They were called second class in their own country, but in the sky, they were first-class pilots. When the Tuskegee Airmen saved white prisoners, the prisoners realized they couldn't sit at the same table with the men who saved their lives. This was America's greatest paradox.
Alabama, 1942. James Jimmy Johnson was 24 years old. Born in Detroit, college graduate, studied engineering. He dreamed of flying. The sky was freedom. But in America, the sky was closed even for a black man. One day, he went to the Army recruitment office. There was a long line, all white men. Jimmy joined the queue. When his turn came, the officer looked at him, furrowed his brow. "What do you want?" "I want to be a pilot, sir." The officer laughed. It was a bitter, degrading laugh. "A pilot? You?" He shook his head. "Negroes can't fly planes. You're not brave, not smart. You don't have the reflexes." Jimmy's heart sank, but he said nothing, because this wasn't the first time he'd heard it. But then, news spread. The Army was starting an experimental program. Black pilots would be trained in Tuskegee, Alabama. Experimental, like a laboratory rat. But Jimmy didn't care. This was his only chance. He applied. He was selected from hundreds of applicants. He went to Tuskegee Institute. On the first day, there was a sign at the camp gate. Colored only. White pilots were on the other side of the camp. Same country, same army, but separate facilities, separate toilets, separate mess halls. Training was harsh. The instructors, white officers, most expected them to fail. Some said it openly. "You're wasting my time here. When the war ends, you'll all go back to the fields." But Jimmy and his friends didn't give up. Every morning, every flight, every simulation, everything was a struggle. One day, the instructor called Jimmy. "Johnson, you fly well, but good isn't enough. You must be perfect, because if you make one mistake, they'll say you all failed." Jimmy bowed his head. "I understand, sir." And he tried to be perfect. They studied late into the nights. They memorized aircraft mechanics, navigation, air combat tactics. But the hardest part was discrimination. When they went into town, they couldn't enter restaurants. They sat in the back of the bus. When a white woman passed on the street, they were expected to step aside. One evening, Jimmy and his friend William Bill Davis had gone to a bar. When they entered, everyone stared at them. The bartender approached. "You can't drink here. There's a door in the back." Bill got angry. "We're American soldiers." The bartender shrugged. "I don't care. Get out." Jimmy grabbed Bill. "Let's go." Outside, Bill clenched his fists. "We're going to fight for this country, but they treat us like this." Jimmy didn't answer, because what could he say?
Months passed. Training continued. Jimmy made his first solo flight in a P-40 Warhawk. In the sky, he was free. Down below, there was no color, race, or discrimination. Just clouds, sun, and endless blue. In that moment, he knew it would all be worth it. In the spring of 1943, the first Tuskegee Airmen graduated. The 99th Fighter Squadron was formed. Jimmy received his rank. He became a lieutenant. A graduation ceremony was held. Families came, mothers, fathers, wives. Jimmy's mother had come from Detroit. When she saw her son in uniform, she cried, "I'm proud of you, son." But that same day, a white officer addressed the group. "You are pilots now, but remember, you may be equal in the sky, but not on the ground." Those words poisoned the air. Shortly after, the unit was sent to North Africa, then Italy. The ship voyage was long. Even on the ship, there was discrimination. Black soldiers were on the lower deck, whites above. But at least they were going to war. It was time to prove themselves.
Italy, 1944. The 99th Fighter Squadron settled at Ramitelli Air Base. Their mission was clear: escort bomber aircraft. On their first missions, white bomber pilots didn't trust them. One pilot said openly, "I don't want Negroes protecting us. They'll get us killed." But the commander had no other choice. The Tuskegee Airmen were assigned. The first mission was bombing Milan. Jimmy boarded his P-51 Mustang. The aircraft's tail was painted red, the origin of their Red Tails nickname. The sky was blue, but danger was everywhere. German Messerschmitt fighters appeared. They were numerous, fast. Jimmy shouted over the radio, "Enemy aircraft, 2 o'clock. All units prepare for attack." The air battle began. The sky filled with bullets and smoke. Aircraft chased each other, turned, fired. Jimmy pursued a German fighter. He aimed, fired. The plane caught fire and fell. But more were coming. The bombers were defenseless, slow. The Tuskegee Airmen protected them tightly. When the mission ended, all bomber aircraft returned safely. As they landed, one of the white pilots spoke over the radio. "Red Tails, thank you. You saved our lives." Jimmy nodded. Maybe now they'd look at them differently. But when they returned to base, the white pilots went to separate barracks. Meals were eaten separately. Nothing had changed. Bill spoke angrily. "We saved their lives, but they still won't eat with us." Jimmy didn't answer because what could he say? June 1944. Mission: operation at a German POW camp in northern Italy. The camp held dozens of American prisoners, mostly white pilots. Intelligence reported the camp would be moved soon. Prisoners would be taken to Germany, perhaps never rescued. The operation would be risky and difficult. The 99th Fighter Squadron received support duty. Ground forces would raid the camp. Tuskegee Airmen would provide air cover. The flight began early in the morning. The camp was in the mountains, forested. German headquarters was nearby. Jimmy and his team patrolled the sky. Their eyes were everywhere. German reinforcements could arrive any moment. Below, ground forces raided the camp. Gunshots, explosions rose. Then a voice came over the radio. "German fighters approaching. We need support immediately." Jimmy hit the throttle. "Red Tails, engage!" German Focke-Wulf aircraft appeared. They were preparing to bomb the camp. Jimmy cut them off. He fired, maneuvered. Other Tuskegee Airmen joined. The air battle was fierce. A German aircraft got behind Jimmy. Bullets grazed his plane. Bill shouted over the radio, "Jimmy, on your 6, turn right." Jimmy made a sharp maneuver, left the German behind, then turned back and fired. The German plane fell. Finally, all German aircraft were repelled. Below, the camp was captured. Prisoners were rescued. When they returned to base, Jimmy was tired but satisfied. He had done his duty. But the real moment would come later. 2 days later, the rescued prisoners were brought to the base. Jimmy was in the mess hall. Black pilots sat in a separate corner, as always. A few white prisoners entered. They'd been given clean uniforms, their faces still tired and shaken. Among them, Lieutenant Thomas Walker looked around. His eyes caught the Tuskegee Airmen's table. He asked the soldier beside him, "Who were they?" 99th Fighter Squadron, Tuskegee Airmen. They rescued your camp." Walker's eyes widened. He hesitated for a moment, then approached the table. Jimmy looked up. Walker stood before him, extended his hand. "Lieutenant Thomas Walker, I heard you saved my life. Thank you." Jimmy stood up, shook his hand. "Lieutenant James Johnson, we just did our duty." Walker nodded. "No, you did more. You risked yourselves for us. I'm grateful." There was a moment of silence. Then Walker added, "May I sit and have a drink with you?" Jimmy was surprised. The other Tuskegee pilots were too, because this had never happened. Jimmy nodded. "Sure." Walker sat down. A few other white prisoners joined. They talked about the war, the sky, their families. Walker asked Jimmy, "How many missions have you flown?" 35. "How many enemy kills?" 7 confirmed. Walker whistled. "Impressive." Then there was silence. Walker looked at his glass. "Johnson, I want to ask you something. Why? Why do you fight like this?" Jimmy frowned. "What do you mean?" Walker struggled to speak. "I mean, this country doesn't treat you well. I know that, I see it. But you're still here, risking your life. Why?" Jimmy took a deep breath. "Because this is my country too. It's not perfect, it doesn't see me as equal, but I want it to change. And maybe, if I prove myself in the sky, things will change on the ground too." Walker nodded, but there was something in his eyes. Shame. "You're right," he said quietly. "You're right, and I never thought about it." That evening, for the first time, white and black soldiers sat at the same table. But when morning came, Walker and the other prisoners were sent to America. And Jimmy realized a truth. They were equal on the battlefield, but after the war ended, nothing would change.
August 1945. The war ended. The Tuskegee Airmen returned home. They had flown over 450 missions. They never lost a single bomber they escorted to enemy fire. An unprecedented record. 66 pilots had been killed, but their legacy was unforgettable. When Jimmy returned to New York Harbor, he embraced his mother. "My son, my hero," his mother said, crying. But when they left the harbor, they faced reality. They boarded a bus. The driver looked at Jimmy. Back of the bus. Jimmy stopped. He wore his uniform, medals on his chest. "Sir, I said back." Jimmy bowed his head and went to the back. His mother held his hand. "Son, this will change. One day." But Jimmy struggled to believe it. When they returned to Detroit, their neighborhood hadn't changed. Same discrimination, same boundaries. One day he met an old friend. The friend had never gone to war. "Jimmy, you fought. You became a pilot. But look, we're still here. Nothing's changed." Jimmy looked out the window. Maybe. But the seed was planted. 1948. President Harry Truman signed an executive order banning racial segregation in the military. The success of the Tuskegee Airmen played a role in that decision. When Jimmy heard the news, he smiled. "A beginning," he said. "Just a beginning." In the 1950s, the civil rights movement grew stronger. The Tuskegee Airmen became symbols. They had fought with courage in the sky. Now, on the ground, they fought for equality. Jimmy gave speeches to young activists. In the sky, no one asked my color. They only asked if I did my duty. The ground should be the same. One day in the early 1960s, Jimmy was sitting in a restaurant. A white man approached, elderly. His hair had turned white. "Are you Lieutenant Johnson?" Jimmy looked up. "Yes." The man extended his hand. "Thomas Walker. Do you remember Italy, 1944?
Jimmy's eyes widened. "Of course. How are you?" Walker sat down. "I'm well, but I needed to talk to you. That day, I sat with you, but then I returned to America, and I did nothing. I stayed silent, and that's bothered me for years." Jimmy nodded. "I understand." Walker continued, "But now I'm old. I have grandchildren, and I told them your story. I told them I owe you. I hope they make a better world." Jimmy smiled. "I hope so too." Walker stood, shook his hand again. "Thank you, Captain Johnson, not just for my life, but for opening my eyes."
The Tuskegee Airmen are among the bravest and most neglected heroes in American history. They were called insufficient, but they became legends in the sky. They were called second class, but they fought with first-class courage. And most importantly, they proved a truth. Courage knows no color. Honor knows no race. Humanity knows no boundaries. Pilots like James Johnson didn't just fight the enemy. They fought prejudice in their own country, and they won. Today, the Tuskegee Airmen are remembered, honored, celebrated, because they fought for freedom, not just against the enemy, but against injustice. And that is the greatest victory. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe, because history is full of stories of courage and change, and we will remember them together.